under a bruised Texas sky. The wind came first, hot, sharp, and heavy with the scent of dust and rain, the kind that carried warnings across miles of dying grass. Clara went and stood on the porch of her father's ranch, her hand wrapped around a chipped coffee mug gone cold. The cattle pens below were half empty now. The barn roof sagged, and the fence line leaned like a drunkard after payday. She'd done all she could to keep the place alive, but the land was tired, and so was she. Thunder rolled low and long, like a growl from something ancient. In the distance, a rider broke the horizon, a dark shape against the coming storm. Clara knew right away who it was. Folks in town had whispered for weeks that he was coming. Colt Mercer, the man who collected debts for the Mercer Company, son of the same devil who built half the county and ruined the other half doing it. She set the mug down and smoothed her dress, though the fabric was already worn thin. Her heart thudded as the rider drew near, the rhythmic strike of hooves echoing through the valley. By the time he reached the front gate, thunder cracked overhead, and the first drops of rain hit the porch like thrown gravel. Colt swung down from his horse, his boots striking mud with solid, unhurried weight. His coat was dark as nightfall, slick with rain, and a silver badge gleamed faintly on the brim of his hat. Not a sheriff's star, but something colder, more personal. The insignia of the Mercer brand. He looked up at her with steady gray eyes, the kind that saw too much and cared too little. Miss Winton. His voice was low, deliberate. Your father home? Clara hesitated, her hands clasped tight. He's sick, she said finally. Can't come to the door. He nodded once, like that changed nothing. Then I'll see him inside. Before she could protest, he stepped past her, boots heavy on the warp boards. The smell of rain and horse trailed him into the small, dim parlor where her father lay coughing in the corner room. Henry Winton was a large man once, broad-shouldered and loud, but now he was little more than bones under a thin quilt, his breath shallow and wet. His eyes flickered open as Colt approached. I told your men already, Henry rasped. You'll get your payment when the harvest comes. Colt didn't flinch. He removed his hat and set it on the table, raindrops pattering to the floor. The harvest's long gone, Mr. Winton. You're 6 months behind, and your note's been sold twice. I'm the one who owns it now. Henry coughed until it turned into a choke, and Clara rushed to steady him. She glared at Colt over her father's shoulder. You've got no right barging in here like this. Colt's voice stayed calm, almost weary. Ma'am, I don't like this any more than you do, but business don't wait on sickness. You think this is business? She snapped. This is a man's life you're talking about. He looked at her then, really looked. The anger in her face, the dirt under her nails, the faint tremor in her voice from holding everything together too long. Something flickered behind his eyes, gone as quick as it came. Sometimes, he said quietly, it's both. Henry tried to speak again, but the effort broke him into a coughing fit that left blood on his lips. Clara's heart seized at the sight. Colt turned away, jaw tight, staring out the window where the rain now fell in sheets. When the coughing stopped, Henry lay still, his breathing shallow as a dying flame. Give me till spring, he whispered. I'll pay what's owed. Colt shook his head. There's no spring for debts like this. The old man's eyes closed, exhaustion dragging him under. Clara straightened, her voice trembling but sharp. You'll get nothing from us. Not the land, not the house. I'll see it burn first. He met her stare without flinching. You might, but fire won't clear the note. The words cut deeper than he seemed to intend. Clara turned away, her jaw tight, the sound of rain filling the silence between them. Colt waited a long moment, then reached into his coat and placed a folded document on the table, a foreclosure notice signed and sealed. I'll be back by morning, he said. Decide then how you want to do this. She didn't answer. He left his hat off as he stepped outside into the storm, the wind tearing at his coat. She watched him ride off into the dark, lightning flashing around him like a curse from heaven. That night, the rain didn't stop. It came harder, pounding the roof until water leaked through in thin, steady lines. Clara stayed by her father's side, feeding him broth he couldn't swallow, wiping his brow with a rag gone warm and damp. He woke once, eyes glassy with fever. I tried, girl, he murmured. Lord knows I did. When your ma passed, I thought I could keep it all going. But the land turned on me, like it always does. Don't talk like that, she whispered. You'll get better. He gave her a faint smile, the kind that said he knew better. Promise me one thing. Whatever happens tomorrow, don't let them take your pride. That's all we got left. She nodded, tears hot her eyes. By dawn, the fever took him. He went quiet, his chest still, the wind outside the only sound left. Clara sat there for a long while, staring at the lines of his face softening in the pale morning light. When the knock came at the door, she didn't move. It came again, steady, patient. She rose, wiped her face, and opened it. Colt Mercer stood there, coat dry now, hat pulled low. He took one look at her, then past her, to the still form under the blanket. His jaw clenched. I'm sorry, he said simply. Clara stepped aside. You came for your debt. Take it in graves if you must. He walked in quietly, his boots heavy on the floorboards. The house smelled of smoke and damp earth. He removed his hat again, looking at Henry's body with something that might have been regret. Your father, he began, but she cut him off. My father's dead, and your company killed him. He didn't argue. You'll need to settle what's left. I can't leave it open. She gave a hollow laugh. Settle it how? You think there's gold buried out back. He studied her face. The defiance that was brittle but bright, a flame refusing to die. No, he said finally, but there's work. My ranch needs hands. I'll pay what's owed. You mean I'll pay, she said bitterly, if that's how you see it. He turned to leave, but she stopped him. Why? She demanded. Why not just take the land and be done? For the first time, his voice lost its edge. Because your father saved my life once. Years ago, up near the Pecos. A storm like this one. I owed him something for that. Maybe this makes us even. Clara stared, unsure whether to believe him. Even, she repeated. You call this even? He didn't answer. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the air heavy and still. Colt walked to the door, then paused. Pack what you need, he said without turning. We leave by noon. She felt her throat tighten. You think I'll just ride off with you? Like some servant? He turned his head slightly, the faintest hint of a smirk ghosting his lips. You can stay, but the men who come next won't ask as kindly. Something cold slid through her chest. She looked toward the window, toward the land her father had worked, the graves of the cattle, the broken fences. The ranch was dying. So was the past. When Colt left, she went to her father's room one last time. She folded his blanket neatly, laid his hat across his chest, and whispered something only the dead could keep. By the time the undertaker came from town, she'd already packed her things. A worn shawl, her mother's Bible, a locket, and the silver-handled revolver her father once carried but never used. At noon, Colt waited by the gate, astride his bay gelding. A second horse stood beside him, saddled and ready. Clara stepped out of the house, without looking back. You sure about this? He asked. No, she said, but it's all I've got left. He nodded, his expression unreadable. She climbed into the saddle, the reins rough in her hands. The air smelled of wet earth and wild sage. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Colt turned his horse west, toward the low hills and the road beyond. They rode in silence. The sun broke through the clouds at last, gold light spilling across the valley. Behind them, the Winton Ranch stood small and lonely against the horizon, the smoke from the chimney curling into the pale sky. Hours passed. The road turned rocky, cutting through dry gullies where the wind carried nothing but the hiss of sand. Clara stole glances at the man beside her, his broad shoulders, the dark stubble on his jaw, the steady way he held the reins. He looked like a man who'd seen too much and learned not to flinch from any of it. When they stopped by a stream at dusk, she finally spoke. Was it true, what you said about my father? He nodded, kneeling to water his horse. He saved me after a raid. I was just a hand back then, not worth the bullet they'd have used. He didn't owe me anything, but he patched me up anyway. Never forgot that. Funny, she said. You remember his mercy, but not his name when it came to your ledgers. He met her gaze evenly. I didn't come here to hurt you, Clara. But the world doesn't care about what's fair. It just moves forward. She looked away, the sunset staining the water red. Maybe, but some of us get left behind while others call it progress. He didn't argue. They rode on until the stars came out, the land wide and endless around them. Somewhere behind them lay a home she'd never see again, and ahead, a future she couldn't trust. When they stopped for the night, Colt built a fire and handed her a blanket. You'll be safe, he said simply. She sat by the flames, silent. The night was still but for the crackle of wood and the cry of a coyote far off. For the first time since her father's death, she let herself breathe. Colt sat across from her, hat tipped low, eyes half-lidded but watchful. The firelight caught the scar that ran along his jaw, the mark of some long-forgotten fight. She wondered what kind of man he really was, the debt collector or the one who'd save her father's life. Maybe both. When she finally lay down, she thought she heard him whisper something into the dark, low and almost tender. You did right by him. She didn't know if he meant her or himself. But as sleep took her, she felt the strange, unwelcome thought that maybe the road ahead wasn't punishment. It was the start of something neither of them yet understood. By dawn, the fire was cold, and the world ahead stretched wide and uncertain. Colt was already saddling the horses, the rising sun burning gold against the silhouette. Clara climbed to her feet, heart heavy but unbowed. She didn't know where he was leading her, only that there was no going back. And when he turned in the morning light and said, "Come with me," she did. The sun rose behind a veil of dust, turning the plains the color of old copper. Colt Mercer rode ahead, his broad shoulders cutting a clean shape against the horizon. Clara followed close behind, her mare kicking up dry soil with every step. The morning air was sharp, tasting of iron and sage, and the only sound was the steady rhythm of hooves over the hard ground. They'd been riding since dawn, bound west toward the line of low hills where Colt's ranch waited. He didn't speak much, and when he did, his voice carried the weight of someone used to command. Clara wasn't sure what she'd expected. Maybe cruelty, maybe silence. But what unsettled her most was how calm he seemed, as if leading a stranger through half the county was just another piece of unfinished business. By mid-morning, the land flattened into open range, scattered with brittle mesquite and skeletons of cattle that hadn't survived the last drought. The wind picked up hot and restless. Clara shifted in the saddle, her back aching, but she said nothing. Pride had carried her through harder things than this. Colt slowed his horse, glancing over his shoulder. You keeping up all right? She met his gaze coolly. If I fall behind, it won't be from weakness. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, more like something he'd forgotten how to do. Didn't say it would. They rode on, passing a dry creek bed where buzzards circled low. A single wooden cross jutted from the sand, sun-bleached and nameless. Clara's eyes lingered on it. How many men do you think die out here, without anyone to bury them? Most, Colt said flatly. Out here, graves as common as dust. Something in his tone made her glance at him. He rode stiffly, his hand brushing the worn revolver on his hip every so often, like habit more than thought. He carried himself like a man who expected trouble and maybe deserved it. By noon, the heat turned cruel. They stopped beside a patch of cottonwoods, growing near a half-dry spring. Colt dismounted, filled his canteen, and handed it to her first. She hesitated before drinking. "Why me first?" she asked. "'Cause you look like you'd argue if I didn't," he said, crouching to drink from his hands. Despite herself, she almost laughed. But the sound caught in her throat when a faint echo rolled across the plains, a gunshot, far off but distinct. Colt froze, eyes narrowing. He stood, scanning the ridgeline. "Get your horse," he said quietly. "What is it?" He didn't answer, only reached for his rifle. Within moments, the horizon moved. 3 riders cresting the hill, dust curling behind them like smoke. Colt's jaw tightened. Outlaws. Keep low. Clara's heart pounded. She crouched beside a fallen log as the men drew closer. Their shouts carried on the wind. Rough voices, hungry for trouble. Colt stepped into the open, rifle raised. "Keep your distance," he called. The lead rider laughed. "Well, if it ain't Mercer himself. Didn't figure you'd be this far from your silver spoon." Colt's voice turned cold. "This isn't your ground, Pike. Turn around." The outlaw grinned through crooked teeth. "Heard you've been carrying company funds. Figured we'd save you the trip." The first shot came fast, whistling past Colt's shoulder. Clara flinched. Colt returned fire in the same heartbeat, his bullet tearing through the outlaw's hat brim. The other two drew their guns, shouting curses. Clara grabbed her father's revolver from her saddlebag, hands trembling. The world shrank to sound and motion, the crack of gunfire, the grunt of horses, the sting of smoke. One rider spurred forward, aiming for Colt's flank. Clara fired before she could think. The recoil nearly tore the gun from her hands, but the shot found its mark. The outlaw jerked backward, tumbling off his horse into the dirt. Colt spun, eyes flicking to her for an instant. Shock, then something else. Approval. The last man fled, firing wild shots over his shoulder as he vanished into the brush. Silence fell again, thick and heavy. The smell of gunpowder hung in the air. Colt lowered his rifle, chest heaving. "You shoot like you've done it before." Clara's hand shook as she holstered the revolver. "Never at a man." He nodded, respect settling in his eyes. "Could have fooled me." They dragged the dead outlaw into the shade. Colt searched his pockets, finding a torn letter seal with the Mercer crest. He stared at it, jaw tightening. "What is it?" she asked. "Trouble," he muttered. "My father's old men. Looks like they want what's left of the company, starting with me." The revelation hung between them. Clara thought of the stories she'd heard in town, how the Mercer name once meant power and fear in equal measure. It made sense now. Colt wasn't running a company. He was running from one. They rode hard until dusk, not speaking. The land around them turned rugged, carved with gullies and red cliffs. When they finally stopped for the night, it was in the shell of an abandoned mining cabin, its roof sagging but still whole. The air smelled of cedar smoke and damp stone. Inside, Colt lit a small fire and checked his wound, just a graze on his arm, bleeding through the sleeve. Clara moved closer before she realized what she was doing. "Let me see." He looked up wary, but didn't stop her. She tore a strip from her petticoat, soaked it in whiskey, and pressed it to the cut. He hissed through his teeth. "You could have told me," she said. "You're bleeding like a fool. Didn't seem polite, complaining after you saved my hide." She frowned, tying the bandage tight. "Don't flatter me. I didn't shoot him for you." "Then who for?" She hesitated. "For me. I'm tired of watching men take everything and leave nothing behind." He studied her face, the firelight throwing gold across her cheekbones. "You've got your father's grit." He said nearly the same thing once. Her hands paused. "You knew him well then?" "Well enough to owe him," Colt said softly. "I was 18 when a storm took my herd. Your father found me half dead in a ravine, patched me up, and gave me work till spring. Never asked for a cent back. When my old man offered to buy his land years later, I told him not to. He didn't listen." Clara sat back, silent. The fire cracked between them, throwing shadows that danced across the cabin walls. She wanted to hate Colt Mercer, but each word of his made it harder. The man before her wasn't the monster she'd imagined. He was someone broken, tried to mend in a world that didn't forgive. Outside, thunder rumbled again, though no rain followed. The air felt charged, heavy with things unsaid. "You could have walked away," she said finally. "Let your father's men take what they wanted." "I tried," he admitted. "But when a man carries a name like mine, he don't get to walk far. Folks either expect the devil or the savior, never just a man." She looked at him across the fire. "Which are you?" His eyes lifted to hers. Still figuring that out. The storm rolled closer through the night, wind howling against the cabin walls. They sat together in silence, both pretending not to notice how near the other was. When she dozed, head resting against her arm, he draped his coat over her shoulders. Near dawn, the wind died. The world outside was quiet again, too quiet. Colt stepped outside to check the horses and froze. Tracks fresh ones, leading down from the ridge. He woke Clara with a whisper. "We've got company." Her eyes snapped open, fear flashing before she pushed it down. They packed quickly, dousing the fire. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, 3 riders appeared in the distance. Different men, but carrying the same hunger in their eyes. Colt swung into the saddle. Hold tight. We'll ride south through the ravine. The chase began before the words left his mouth. The outlaws shouted, spurring their horses hard. Bullets hissed through the air, biting into stone and dirt. Clara clung to the reins, ducking low as her mare tore down the rocky trail. Colt fired back without slowing, each shot ringing sharp in the canyon's echo. One rider fell, but the others pressed on. Dust choked the air, blinding them both. Clara's horse stumbled on a loose rock, nearly throwing her, but Colt's arm shot out, steadying her before she fell. "Keep going," he barked. They burst from the ravine onto open ground, the land stretching wide ahead. The outlaws lagged for a moment, their mounts heaving for breath. Colt pulled up near a cluster of boulders, rifle ready. "They'll circle back," he said. "We hold here." Clara loaded her father's revolver again, her hand steadier this time. "You trust me to shoot?" "I trust you to survive," he said simply. The gunfight was short but fierce. Colt dropped one man clean, and Clara's shot sent the other fleeing into the distance, swearing vengeance. When the echoes faded, silence returned, broken only by the sound of wind through dry grass. Colt leaned on his rifle, breathing hard. "That's twice you've saved me now. I'm starting to think you're bad luck." She gave him a faint, exhausted smile. "Or maybe I'm the only reason you're not bones in the sand." He laughed, a real laugh, rough and unpracticed. The sound startled them both. They rode until dusk again, finding shelter near a narrow river lined with willows. The air cooled, the scent of water sweet after the day's chase. Colt tethered the horses and lit a small fire, the flames reflecting in his gray eyes. Clara sat nearby, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee. "You could have left me back there," she said quietly. "Would have been easier." He shook his head. "Would have been wrong." She studied him through the smoke. "You don't strike me as a man who worries much about right or wrong." He looked into the fire. "Used to be I didn't. Then I got tired of counting how many lives a Mercer name cost." The confession settled heavy in the night air. Clara's heart softened, though her voice stayed cool. "So, this is your way of fixing it? Dragging me halfway across Texas to work off a debt that wasn't mine." His eyes lifted to hers, steady. "No, this is me trying to pay one that was—" The river murmured beside them, the sound soft as breath. For a long while, neither spoke. Then, without looking up, Colt said, "You've got a choice when we reach my ranch. Stay, work, build something new, or walk away free. No one will come after you." "And what do you do?" she asked. "Same thing I've been doing," he said. "Try to make peace with what's left." She nodded, but her gaze lingered on him. For the first time, she wondered what peace might look like. For him, for herself. When she lay down that night, the stars stretched endless above, and for the first time since her father's death, she didn't dream of graves or debts. She dreamed of open fields, the sound of hooves, and a voice beside her saying softly, "Maybe some debts can't be paid with coin." And when she woke, the world felt just a little less heavy, though danger still shadowed the road ahead. The dawn broke like a bruise over the prairie, streaks of pink and gold bleeding through the clouds that hung low over the range. The wind had shifted east overnight, bringing with it the smell of wet earth and the sound of distant thunder rolling across the flats. The kind of morning that made a man feel like the world was holding its breath. Eli sat outside the cabin with his hat tilted low, a cup of coffee cooling between his palms. He hadn't slept much. He didn't need to. Men like him had learned to live between the hours, to listen for footsteps in the dark and remember what was owed in silence. The debt had changed shape since the day he rode into that town to collect it. What had begun as numbers and papers had become something far heavier. Inside, Clara moved quietly, her steps soft but sure. The first light caught her hair, turning it to copper fire. She'd been up before him, tending to the stove, checking on the mare, setting the morning right. There was something steady about her now, a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. She wasn't a frightened daughter of a broken man anymore. She was a woman who had faced down the storm and still stood tall. "Coffee's cold," she said, stepping out onto the porch. Eli looked up at her, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. "Ain't the worst thing I've tasted." She sat beside him, the space between them filled with the sound of wind moving through the grass. Neither spoke for a while. The land stretched out before them, endless and raw. Out there, the world didn't care about debts or names. It only cared if you had the grit to stand. Finally, Clara said, "They'll come for you, won't they?" He didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Reynolds don't let go easy. Man like that don't take kindly to being cheated. You didn't cheat him. Eli gave a slow shrug. "Depend which side you ask." She turned to face him, her gaze sharp. "You could leave. There's time. You could be halfway to Dakota before he even gets word." Eli met her eyes, steady and calm. "And leave you here? After all that's been done?" Clara's throat tightened. "He's not after me." Eli looked away. "Not yet." A silence settled over them, heavier than the morning air. Clara wanted to argue, to tell him he didn't owe her anything, but the words wouldn't come, because deep down, she knew he wasn't staying out of duty. He was staying because something inside him had shifted, just as it had inside her. The sound of hooves carried faintly on the wind then, and Eli's head snapped up. He stood, the chair scraping back. Clara rose with him, heart pounding. "Riders?" she asked. Eli nodded once. 3, maybe 4. Coming fast. He moved inside, grabbed his rifle from the wall, and checked the chamber with practiced ease. Clara followed him, her hands trembling as she reached for the small pistol he'd taught her to use. "Stay low," he said, his tone calm but firm. "If they break the fence line, you fire. Don't think. Don't wait. Just fire." She swallowed hard. "And you?" Eli met her gaze, eyes dark as the storm rolling in. "I'll buy us some time." He stepped out into the yard, the wind tugging at his coat, his boots crunching over the dirt. The riders were closer now. He could see the dust they kicked up, the glint of metal in the morning light. Reynolds rode at the front. His coat was black, his face pale as chalk under the brim of his hat. Behind him, 2 hired guns, hard men with eyes like cold nails. Eli stood tall, the rifle cradled in his arms, waiting. Reynolds reined in a few yards from the porch. "You always did like making things difficult, Carter." Eli's expression didn't change. "You always did like hiding behind other men's guns." Reynolds' lips curled into a smirk. "That's the thing about rich men, Eli. We pay for convenience." His gaze flicked toward the cabin. "Heard you've taken in the girl. How charitable of you." Eli's voice dropped. "You'll keep her name out of your mouth." The 2 men behind Reynolds shifted in their saddles, hands twitching near their holsters. The tension hung thick, like the air before a lightning strike. Reynolds laughed softly. "All this fuss over a debt that was never yours. Makes me wonder, what is she to you, really?" Eli's answer came like gravel ground between teeth. "Everything you'll never understand." And then the world exploded into motion. The first shot came from Reynolds' left hand, quick and mean. Eli dropped to one knee and fired back. The crack of the rifle split in the morning. One of Reynolds' men tumbled from his horse, hitting the dirt hard. Clara screamed from the porch, but her voice was lost in the roar of gunfire. Reynolds spun his horse, shouting orders, but Eli was already moving, rolling behind the trough. Another shot whistled past his ear. He rose, fired twice, and saw the second gunman slump sideways, clutching his chest. Reynolds cursed, his horse rearing. He turned to flee, but Eli's voice cut through the chaos. "Don't run, Reynolds. You came all this way." The words froze the man in place. He turned slowly, eyes burning with hate. "You think this ends with me?" Eli stepped forward, rifle leveled. "It ends right here." For a moment, time seemed to stretch thin as glass. Then Reynolds moved, fast, desperate. His gun came up, but Eli's shot came first. The bullet struck home, sending Reynolds tumbling from his horse into the dirt. The echo of the gunfire rolled away into the hills. Then there was only the sound of the wind. Eli stood still, breathing hard, the rifle hanging loose at his side. Clara rushed to him, tears streaking her cheeks. "It's over," she whispered. "It's finally over." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. For now, they buried the man before noon, out by the old cottonwoods near the creek. The ground was hard, and the work was slow. When it was done, Eli stood over the graves, his hat in his hands, and said nothing. Clara watched him, understanding that silence spoke louder than words ever could. Later, as the sun sank low, they sat on the porch again. The world had gone quiet, save for the soft call of mourning doves somewhere out in the distance. Clara broke the silence first. "What happens now?" Eli looked out at the horizon, where the sky was bleeding into twilight. "Now we start again." She studied him, her voice small. "Together?" His gaze shifted to her then, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something break through that hardened calm. Something warm, fragile, and real. "Yeah," he said softly. "Together." But peace was a rare thing on the frontier, and it didn't come easy. In the days that followed, word of Reynolds' death began to spread. Travelers passing through brought whispers. Reynolds' brothers, his partners, the men who'd lost money in his schemes. They were looking for the man who'd gunned him down. Eli knew it was only a matter of time. He spent the next week repairing fences, stockpiling supplies, teaching Clara how to ride faster, shoot straighter, think sharper. There was a quiet understanding between them. They were building something worth protecting, even if it might one day be taken. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Clara turned to him. "You could still leave," she said. "If they come for you, I won't blame you for running." Eli shook his head. "Running's never saved a man. Only living right does." She looked at him for a long time, then reached for his hand. "Then we'll live right. Together." Her fingers fit against his rough palm, small but certain. For the first time in years, Eli felt something close to peace. That night, the wind picked up again, carrying the scent of rain. He stood outside long after Clara had gone to bed, watching the lightning flicker over the plains. The land stretched before him, wild and endless. He knew what was coming, but he wasn't afraid. When dawn came, it was soft and silver, the kind of morning that made the world feel clean again. Clara joined him on the porch, her hair loose, her eyes bright despite the long nights. "You ever think about what it was like before all this?" she asked. Eli nodded slowly. "Every day, but thinking don't change much." "No," she said, smiling faintly, "but it reminds us why we fight to keep what we have." He looked at her then, the way the light touched her face, the way she stood tall against the rising sun. For a man who'd spent his life chasing debts and shadows, he'd finally found something worth owing his heart to, a lone hawk wheeled high above, crying out over the open fields. Eli watched it disappear into the sky and felt the corners of his mouth lift. Maybe the frontier wasn't just a place. It was a test, like all the old-timers said. A test of will, of heart, of how far man could go to make peace with himself. He turned to Clara. "Come on," he said, his voice quiet but sure. "We got work to do." She nodded, and together they stepped down into the light, the door closing softly behind them. And though the horizon still carried the weight of storms to come, for now, the air felt lighter. The ranch was quiet, the world wide open. Some debts could never be repaid, but some, like the one between two souls who found each other in the dust and ruin of the West, didn't need to be. They were written not in coin or contract, but in the way two people chose to stand side by side when the world told them fall. And in that silence, as the sun rose over the endless prairie, the promise of something new began, fragile as dawn, fierce as love.